This episode of Recording Studio Rockstars is brought to you by OWC, Spectra 1964, Sampley, and Isotope. You're hearing my voice right now on the Spectra 1964 STX 100 mic pre through Isotope, RX, and Ozone, all recorded safely onto an OWC SSD. So get ready to rock.
The thing that makes you feel most unqualified is usually the thing that's actually your strongest asset. I felt unqualified to enter film scoring. I wasn't classically trained. I didn't really listen to film music. For the longest time, I was like, oh, there's no way I could be a composer. But what I learned is that I actually brought a bunch of different things to the table that maybe, I don't want to say gave me an upper hand, but certainly set me apart from a lot of people who maybe went through more traditional pathways.
Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is the podcast created to help you become a rock star of the recording studio. Want to know how I get a consistent sound quality mixing hundreds of episodes of Recording Studio Rockstars? Well, I've been cheating all along by using Isotope, RX, and Ozone on every single episode. Right now, you're hearing RX declick, declip, DS, deplosive, voice denoise, Ozone multiband compression, EQ, and limiting on this podcast episode. Try out the subscription option with an extended 30-day free trial at isotope.com/rockstars or use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off any individual plugin purchase. Before your band hits the studio, it's smart to have all the songs and notes in one place. But setting up a shared cloud folder can be frustrating. There's always someone in the band who can't seem to log in or wants to use a different platform. Sampley.app makes it easy to add collaborators to a project so that the whole band can upload new songs and make comments before the session. It's file sharing that was specifically built for music. Just upload a voice memo or song and start commenting. Sign up for your free account with 2 projects now at Sampley.app or use the coupon code RSR20 to get 20% off the first 3 months. Howdy, Rockstars. It's your host, Lid Shaw, and welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars, bringing you into the studio to learn from recording professionals so that you can make your best record ever and be a rock star of the studio yourself. My guest today is Freddy Avis, a composer, producer, and solo artist in the indie electronic band Arswain out of Los Angeles, California. Freddy is also a music composer for film and TV and got his start in composition under the acclaimed Emmy-nominated composer James S. Levine, who is known for Glee, American Horror Story, Bloodline, Nip Tuck, The Last Ship, at Hans Zimmer's Remote Control Productions in Santa Monica, California. Since then, Freddy holds music credits on shows including Major Crimes, Why Women Kill, Instinct, Star and Chambers, as well as placements on Tiger King, Shark Tank, Dateline, and The Dr. Oz Show. He's contributed synth and percussion work on 8-time Oscar-nominated composer James Newton Howard's score for Walt Disney feature Jungle Cruise, as well as additional music for Steve Jablonsky's score for Why Women Kill. Freddy holds a pair of bachelor's degrees in music and political science from Stanford University, where he also pitched for the baseball team. And in fact, in 2012, he was drafted by the Washington Nationals in the 25th round of the Major League Baseball draft. Amazing, man. The band that is Freddy's, Arswain, has some amazing music and video productions that, to me, create soundscapes and surreal worlds in a very cinematic way. And today I'm excited to talk about how he creates in his studio and composes music for film and TV in Los Angeles. So please welcome Freddy Avis, aka Arswain, to Recording Studio Rockstars. Freddy, are you ready to rock, my friend?
I'm ready to rock hard. Let's do this.
Awesome, dude. Well, it's great to have you here, man. And I really enjoyed learning about you and discovering your music and just kind of seeing all these cool things to do. I can't believe you were drafted for Major League Baseball. What's the story with that?
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks, Lid, for having me on the show. It's great to be here. That's actually a very appropriate place to start our podcast because that's kind of where my music career began. So in high school, I obviously played baseball. I was drafted by the Nationals my senior year. Ultimately decided to forego the draft and go to college, which was always the plan. And what happens in college is that you play 3 years, and then you're re-eligible to enter the draft. So my plan was to play 3 years and then go play pro ball after that. But what ended up happening is that when I first got to college, I injured my shoulder, and I actually ended up tearing my labrum in my right shoulder, which is sort of important for pitching. Can't really pitch without a shoulder. And I proceeded to get rehab. I got surgery. I was out for 2 years. I redshirted, came back, and it just was never the same.
I love some of the dialogue here, like some of the lingo. Like, what is redshirted? That must have something to do with being on the bench for a minute or something. I don't know.
Yeah, it's when you either are ineligible to play, or you are injured, or maybe you're just not going to get a ton of playing time. So what you can do is redshirt a year. And that means you can't play in any games. So therefore, you don't waste a year of eligibility on a year that you wouldn't be playing anyway. So people who redshirt their first year, for instance, can end up actually being on a team for 5 years because the first year didn't count, if that makes sense.
There's like more rules and regulations around that than submitting for the Grammys, it seems like.
Yeah. I mean, we could get into just how screwed up and complicated college sports are, but I have a feeling that's not what we want to get into.
Well, the funny thing is, I mean, to me, it's a fascinating topic. I personally have never really been a sports fan much until my daughter was playing soccer. And then I was getting told, I'm sorry, sir, are you not a coach? No, you're not allowed to make that much noise from the sidelines. That's when I discovered I was really a sports fan. But it's fascinating to me. And, what was it? You tore your labrum. I was thinking, my first thought was like, oh, that sounds like a good alternate band name if you hadn't gone with
Torn
Arswain,
Labrum.
Yeah, Torn Labrum.
Wow, I really missed out on that opportunity. I'd be platinum by now if I had named it Torn Labrum.
Platinum Labrum, maybe.
Platinum Labrum.
Then it wouldn't have torn. And then, of course, my next question is, which one is slower or more action-packed, whichever way you want to answer this question, a baseball game or production in the studio?
Oh, wow. I mean, they both go by so quickly when you're in the moment. I mean, anyone who's recorded anything, it's like time just flies by.
Indeed.
I think there's sort of the difference I would point to is that I think in baseball, it's very clear what you need to do. You need to, throw the ball and get the guy out. Whereas in the recording studio, everything's fair game and you're sort of entering this like vast unknown. And the challenge becomes like figuring out what the hell you want to do. So
that's interesting. Yeah. It's like you're writing the rules of the game each time you step into the studio.
Exactly. Yeah. You can't, there aren't rules given to you. So I guess to get back to my pivot from baseball to music, I ended up being injured and ultimately retiring from baseball by the time I was a third year student in college. And that was really tough because, I'd planned to play pro ball and that was a financial future for me, was to, get drafted in the first or second round and then, make $1 bajillion and go play an illustrious 10-year career in baseball. And that was no longer an option. So I was deeply lost, went through a really rough period of confusion. And I was just desperate to find something that I could latch onto again that was familiar to me and that I was good at and that gave me the same amount of confidence and self-assurance that baseball afforded me. And frankly, like social status. I think like there was a loss of status too from retiring from sports that really was a shot to my ego, if I'm being honest. Yeah. So naturally, I gravitated back to music because I'd played in rock bands my whole childhood and I'd kind of left.
I thought you were going to say, because egos are important, man.
Egos are, I think to ignore your ego. Yeah, totally. I think to ignore your ego is not an honest way to go through life. But
right.
So I found my way back to music and, in my childhood, I had played in rock bands and my parents got me a a computer when I was pretty young, bless their hearts. And I, learned to produce in GarageBand and then Logic. So I was pretty proficient in all that stuff.
And this is you growing up in California?
Yeah, growing up in Palo Alto. So actually just outside Stanford. And yeah, so I found my way back to music. And then the challenge became, okay, if I want to pursue music, what do I do? I don't have the courage to be an indie artist from the get-go. And also I was at Stanford where I was surrounded by tech and, everyone's going into tech or finance and making tons of money. There's such a focus on money at Stanford.
Right.
It's
tough when your peers and what you're surrounded by is like a sense of uber success. It makes it hard to settle into just kind of, not having to pursue that. I don't know.
Totally. I think it can kill an artist before they even know that they want to be an artist. Being in that environment, it's really competitive. Stanford has great humanities programs and has a great music department, but I had 8 students in my graduating music class.
Wow.
And that's there are 1,700 students in my class, so proportionately speaking, like everyone's a computer scientist.
And did you stay in touch with all 8 of those students, and have they all gone on to launch spaceships to Mars or something like that?
Yeah, exactly. They're all double majors. It's something and music.
Yeah.
Mostly computer science.
I know what you mean, though. I mean, like for me, school was awesome because I went to Middle Tennessee State University, and one of the things that I loved the most about it was being immersed in a group of peers who we all cared about music and recording, and that was like the thing to talk about. But at the same time, I got interested in it like you did out of just a love for music. And then when I moved to Nashville and started working professionally, I found it very hard to balance. I probably still do, like balance that thing that just says like, it's okay to just do it because you love it. You don't have to make your own music always look like the people you work with that are sort of, on a professional mission and goal for every single thing that they do.
Yeah, totally. But having that community, even just as a launching ground, like having a crew is so important, as you know.
Yeah.
Finding those people.
Got to have a team, right? For the baseball. Okay, last baseball analogy for me. When my
they'll
baseball
pop up.
Yeah.
They'll pop up every now and then.
Okay, good. I like it. It seems like there's all these good quotes and takeaways you can do. Like, is it okay to be a base hitter, or do you always have to hit a home run or grand slam with every move? But
totally.
Here's what I was going to say. My baseball experience is Little League when I was little. And I think it was an indicator that I really needed to be in the studio and not ever dream of baseball, because all I remember is standing in the outfield and I'm just daydreaming, literally just daydreaming, standing there with my hands dangling down in my glove, practically scraping the grass. And, the baseball just goes straight over my head, and I'm still daydreaming until I, come to and I realize that everybody is yelling at me to go get the ball.
That's so funny. It's such a type of Little League player who just clearly has other interests. And frankly, I was that kid up until a certain point because I didn't really care about sports until I became good at them.
Yeah. I was probably thinking about girls, but I just didn't know it yet.
Probably. Yeah. Clearly, whatever it was too important to focus on that fly ball.
Awesome. Well, so you managed to do the school thing and pivot from baseball to music and pursue that. What was some of the first stuff that you did with music that, did you, at this point, I'm guessing you didn't go in knowing, I know we joked about your friends all being on a mission, but maybe you did. Maybe you really set your sights high early on.
I think what happened was I knew I wanted to pivot back to music. I knew what kind of music I liked. And luckily Stanford has this incredible department called, it's called CARMA, but it's an acronym for the Center for Computer Research in Music and Acoustics. And that became a haven for me, not only because of the curriculum, but also mostly because of the community. It's this kind of wacky mansion at the back of campus that has gear lying around, has a few recording studios, and the focus there is on experimental computer generated composition.
So awesome.
So yeah, there I really found this incredibly tightly knit and fervent community of musicians who had the same taste that I had. And that became just a kind of a safe haven for me after baseball, a new sort of family of musicians where we collaborated and exchanged music and we played shows together on campus. So that kind of rescued me and became kind of my outlet for the remainder of college. Then what happened was nearing graduation, I started to think like, okay, I know I want to be in music. Like, what should I do? Like, what part of the music industry should I join?
Yeah.
And luckily I had a teammate on the baseball team whose dad is a pretty well-known TV writer and showrunner. And I was talking to him one day and he was like, have you ever considered film scoring? He told me some story about how he like had lunch with some film composer and like they flew to Santa Barbara on like this composer's private helicopter. And he was like, I don't know, like film composing could be a good opportunity for you.
Yeah,
and
I'm sure all film composers have private helicopters.
Exactly. Well, I didn't know any better. And I again, like to re-emphasize the just being surrounded by this money culture at Stanford, I think that kind of thing becomes really intoxicating where like all you want to do is be able to like look people in the eye upon graduating and tell them that you have a sweet opportunity lined up. That's how insecure I was. I wanted to have I wanted to be able to tell people that I wasn't going to be a starving artist, that I had like a legit opportunity. And honestly, if I'm being frank, like that's what drew me to film scoring initially. It wasn't the creative or collaborative aspect. It was like, okay, I could have a financial future doing this.
Yeah, it was the shortest path to fancy wheels on your Tesla in plaid mode.
Yeah, exactly. Right? Exactly.
Sorry, that's my Silicon Valley reference there.
Oh yeah, well it's spot on. I can tell you. So yeah, I got an internship at Remote Control Productions, interning for Ramin Djawadi, did Game of Thrones and Westworld and all that.
Okay, cool.
And that opened my eyes to this whole new world of film composing. And fast forward to exiting college, actually my first job out of college was interning at CAA in their music touring department, that was good because I figured out I definitely don't want to be on the business side of music. I need to be on the creative side. But I ended up getting a job at Remote Control after that and worked there for 2 years. So that's kind of my journey to LA.
So what is a place like Remote Control, Hans Zimmer's studio? How would you describe that to somebody? I think sometimes when we think about this, we just imagine a composer is the one person just doing their thing by themselves in a space. But these places are really like collectives of people working on multiple projects at once, right? And really just a hive of activity, or not?
Yeah, I think you nailed it. That the illusion is that it's a solitary composer, scoring all these shows. And I think what Remote Control has pioneered, and Hans Zimmer specifically has pioneered, is a sort of industrial composing model where you have teams of basically assistants doing a lot of writing for whoever their boss is.
Right.
And the way Remote Control works is that, there are a lot of noteworthy composers there, but they don't actually necessarily all work together. They just rent space from Hans and his business partner, Steve Kofsky.
Uh-huh.
But inevitably, you're right. It does become sort of a hive where there is collaboration between the composers sometimes. But the bulk of the labor sharing happens between composers and their assistants, which I'm happy to talk more about.
Yeah. Well, that was what I was struck by when I first heard about that kind of stuff through some people I knew. And then, the more you learn about how a film gets made, the more you realize, wow, there's a lot of people that have to do a lot of things. And it's like a stage production. It's never an individual doing everything. And it was just cool to realize that the music composition and that side of doing it is similar to that. And I come from a background of having studied architecture first. And so I learned about things like Frank Lloyd Wright and how he would have, a whole office full of drafters and people working on different elements of a building design, and it's overseen by somebody. So anyway, it's just cool. I think it's nice to have that perspective of how music can get created too.
Totally. Yeah. Well, that's interesting. You did architecture. My brother was an architecture major and loved it. And I think it really informed his thinking on a lot of things. But yeah, I hear that analogy a lot with architecture and visual art, where, you know, the boss makes the plans and then they have people carry out those plans. In architecture, it sounds a little different because people are actually making, I forget the term you used, but they make sketches or they make
drafting
plans,
or something.
Drafting, yeah. And then they actually show it to the person. So that's pretty similar to how composing works. I think I don't know how to phrase this delicately, but I think there's a real debate to be had in the film composing world over fairness and creative or divisions of creative labor, and the line between collaboration and, for lack of a better word, exploitation.
Right.
It's just kind of a messy work arrangement where, you know, if you have 4 shows going, there's no way that someone can do it by themselves. So you do get these situations where there's a lot of work being shared and often lopsided credit and financial compensation.
That can be frustrating. I know to be in the midst of, I'm sure.
Yeah. So, you know, I had a much better gig than others. And for that, I'm grateful, you know. But it was food for thought for me as I left remote control and tried to figure out, you know, when I do scale my own operation, when the time comes, like, how can I do that in an equitable and fair way? You know, you simply can't do it by yourself when you have multiple projects going. So,
yeah. And it's, you know, it's interesting to learn and see that taking place even in studio production here in Nashville. Like, you know, people that are often doing really impressive work are very collaborative, you know, and there may be a solo artist version of the process or part of the process, but integrating all the skills of the people that surround you, whether it's like, you know, whether you're doing a production that requires drum editing and you turn to somebody else and they handle that stuff, or, you know, people in Nashville would talk about pocketing the band as a, you know, young engineer for a producer. It's like maybe the band was in there all day, and then at night, the assistant engineer is sort of tightening up the performance and doing stuff. And I've seen producers hand over to the engineer like overdub sessions or vocal things or, you know, stuff like that. And you begin to realize it's like, it's just a collective effort in a cool way. What are some of the things that you felt like you really learned through your film composition experience over there? What are some great takeaways for you or inspirational stuff?
Yeah. I think technically speaking, I learned so much software, which, you know, software is software, but it is relevant in that environment when you need to work really quickly.
Yeah.
So, you know, I learned Cubase, and not only did I learn Cubase, I learned how to program Cubase to make all these fancy macros and shortcuts. I learned how to program Lemur on an iPad so I could trigger shortcuts in Cubase. I learned, you know, my key command, my like ergonomic, or my finger coordination with key commands just like became insane. You learn, it's almost like a sport. There's like a physical component to it. You learn how to like just compose very, very quickly.
Yeah.
More creatively speaking, I think, which is tied to that, is that, you know, going into remote control, I had this very idyllic and naive conception of what film scoring was. It's like, oh, it's an expression of your art, and you get to like really connect with what's happening in picture. And I think in the best cases, that's true. But really, especially in TV, with the, you know, you're turning around an episode a week or less, you have to sort of adopt this different mentality, which depersonalizes the creative process a little bit. And that might sound like it has a negative connotation, but more what I mean is that you don't have to be emotionally tied to everything you write. And it's actually kind of liberating when you start to view it that way. You can be like, okay, I'm going to write this music for this show, and this is the sound that it needs. I may not particularly like what I'm writing, or identify with it, or want to parade it around as like, you know, my style.
Right. It wouldn't necessarily, but what it wouldn't necessarily be what you would do as an artist.
Correct. And frankly, that's the majority of what film composers write, I think. And that's part of the joy of film scoring, is that you do get to be a chameleon.
Yeah.
But what also happens as a result of that is that oftentimes you have to keep more of an arm's distance between you and what you're writing. So I'm at peace with that now. I think that just took a little bit of adjusting. Because again, as you go into film scoring as a young professional, I guess you
a young ex-Major League Baseball player.
Yeah, I guess in my case, yeah. But you go in with this sort of pure idea of what it's going to be like, and it just inevitably turns out differently.
Yeah, so that's a similar experience I had to get comfortable with through engineering and production in Nashville too, was realizing that I came into it with a certain kind of love for a style of music, and I was surrounded by a lot of opportunity for things that I really had no interest in musically, because I'm in the heart of country music. I mean, and so that wasn't something that I was into, but the more I let go of that, the more I realized that there was this wonderful opportunity to work on a wide spectrum of music and really begin to appreciate the craft of all these different styles, which I'm guessing there's a similar interest for you. It's like you might not want to play that music if you were just the artist up on stage doing your thing, but the craft of creating it for sound composition, for music composition, for film might be really intriguing, and it can be very rewarding to get good at doing it.
Absolutely. And I'm sure if you're like me, you found it pretty intellectually stimulating too, to have to learn different genres and sort of inhabit those genres. Like as an intellectual exercise, it's pretty fulfilling. Yeah,
you're introduced to something, you're like, man, how did they make that sound? Like, how do you do that? And then you start exploring it. And you might explore it, do it, and then afterwards you're like, well, I don't want to do that again.
Yeah. But there's also a fear that accompanies it. It's like, I remember someone for this indie film I was scoring, they asked for a bossa nova track. And I was like, I don't know the first thing about bossa nova. And then you just figure it out.
YouTube.
Yeah, YouTube. So yeah, it's always, you never know what you're going to be asked to write. And I think that's part of the joy and challenge.
I had that happen recently where an artist was coming in, and part of the thought was, let's make this, I think this would be appropriate if it had kind of a reggae thing. And I realized, I was like, I kind of know what that is, but I don't really. So I just watched a bunch of YouTube videos on reggae grooves over the weekend. And by Monday, I was able to play a shaky drum part. It was great.
Nice. Yeah, it happens pretty quickly once you just kind of commit to learning a sound, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's fun. Okay, I like to ask guests sometimes for an inspirational quote on the show. Or is there anybody that has really inspired you musically that you want to talk about or share with us?
Yeah, I'd have to point to my mentor and professor at Stanford, this brilliant, amazing composer named Mark Applebaum. He gave a TED Talk, actually. And sorry, this quote requires a little bit of context. He gave this TED Talk maybe 8 years ago, and it was basically him running through his portfolio of work. And he's done everything from, he'll write a piano concerto, but he also does extremely inventive and wacky experimental compositions. Like he did like a sound collage and like choreographed basically hand motions to it and performed those hand motions. He did a piece using like subway timetables.
Oh, wow.
And when the subway would arrive, it would like trigger some musical outcome. And it was this kind of web of sounds being triggered by different subway timetables. So anyway, he's like a highly conceptual, brilliant artist. And throughout this TED Talk, he keeps asking the audience, okay, so I did this, but is it music? And he kept going back to that refrain, this timetable thing. Is it music? Because his pieces get increasingly more abstract and experimental. But at the end of the presentation, he ultimately says, I've been asking the wrong question this entire presentation. It's not, is it music? Let me rephrase. Is it music is the wrong question. Is it interesting is the correct question. Doesn't really matter what it is, whether it's music or whether it's even good or not. Is it interesting to you? And that's always been, I try to think back to that whenever I'm stuck on a piece, when I feel like it's becoming generic, or if I'm pandering to certain tastes or certain audiences that I have in my mind. I just try to remind myself, okay, is this actually interesting to me, or am I just conforming to a genre?
Right.
So yeah, he was a monumental influence for me in college and beyond. And I just, I'm so thankful for that presentation he gave.
Yeah, I think that's great. I mean, I think about going to the art museum and the experience of standing in front of a work of art, and then there's a little plaque, and then, there's a part of you that's like, well, I got to read the plaque, see what it's all about and what it all means. But at the core of that, whether it's something you're looking at as art, whether you need to read about it to understand it for it to be art, it's kind of that same idea. That's kind of missing the point of the question. Is it interesting in that moment? And are you just having an experience, Is there something cool about it? But I think you're also talking about, like, is it interesting to you as the composer?
Yes, and he harps on this too. It's like making art is an inherently selfish endeavor, and like it's necessarily selfish. And what is interesting should just be what's interesting to you. So yeah, that's exactly right.
The Spectra 1964 STX100 mic pre provides unequaled headroom and linear output regardless of transient audio peaks, capturing critical details from your microphone. The 100 series amplifiers were used by Tom Dowd, Muscle Shoals, and the Record Plant on records by ZZ Top, Aerosmith, and John Lennon. Now you can get that same incredible sound in your studio at spectra1964.com or call them at 801-797-0642. In my studio, I've got the Mac Mini M1 paired up with the OWC Mini Stack STX Thunderbolt 4 certified storage and hub expansion solution to connect to all my dedicated audio drives, sample libraries, and backup drives. It's the perfect size to stack with the Mac Mini and add storage and connectivity over Thunderbolt or USB. Whether you have the new or older Mac Mini, nothing stacks up in your studio quite like OWC. Find the new Mini Stack STX and all your storage needs at macsales.com/rockstars. Have you ever followed or watched any of David Lynch's movies? Being in LA yourself there?
we could spend the rest of this podcast nerding out about David Lynch.
Oh man, here we go. Rockstars. Sorry. Everybody has to put up with the fact that whatever I'm into in that moment, if I do a bunch of interviews around that time, it gets brought up. But I'm reading his book, Catching the Big Fish right now.
And, great.
And it's just fun to cross over different forms of art and let, other things inform each other. But, he talks about being opening up yourself, your creative self, so that when an idea arrives, you capture it, you hold on to it. You have a way to capture this idea and then nurture it and let it evolve into something. And I think about all these ways that applies to music. And what was my point of bringing that up? I guess it was, when you're doing this stuff and you're interested in something, I think a little bit about how that pertains to having an initial idea or concept. And particularly in your music and Arswain, am I pronouncing that the right way too? Just Arswain, like that?
Yeah, Arswain.
Okay, great. It's very cinematic and it's conceptual. And one of the questions I wrote down was, are you composing it? It's almost like composing a classical piece rather than a pop song where, in my world, it might be like, okay, 3 to 3.5 minutes is about the right length. And, verse, chorus, bridge, double chorus, outro, throw an intro on the top. You're in the ballpark right there. What are some of the ways that you think about composition and how it pertains to that original idea for you and making sure you're staying in touch with it, along with what your mentor was suggesting as far as being interested in it?
Oh, thank you for asking this question. I think it's so important. I cannot justify writing a piece of music unless I have a concept behind it. It's simply not worth the exercise for me to write a piece of music for the sake of writing a piece of music. If I don't have something to say with it, then in my opinion, the world doesn't need to hear it. So for me, that's vitally important. Most of my concepts come from reading. I get a lot of music inspiration from reading books, nonfiction, novels. They sort of give me the sort of intellectual fuel to feel inspired to write a song or write an album. For my album Partitioning from 2020, that album spawned because I read this incredible book called The Great Derangement, which is all about why the arts aren't properly acknowledging climate change and what the arts and humanities can do to solve the climate issue and why they're so essential to solving the problem.
Interesting.
And that kicked off this whole, not only concept for the album, but it gave me a reason to write music again. I was like, okay, like music isn't just this hobby or thing that's fun to do anymore. It's actually like important for the species, It's actually an amazing tool that we have to reckon with the issues of our time. And that's sort of a utilitarian take on music. But I think there's a lot of truth in it. It made writing an album all of a sudden this worthwhile exercise, whereas before it would have felt more recreational.
Right.
So yeah, definitely concepts are essential to my writing process.
So Partitioning, the album cover itself looks like a cross between agricultural landscaping and solar panels and a digital LED display of your synths, and the production itself. If I'm looking at the right one, I think so, right?
Yeah, the big plot of land.
Yeah. And so it's like a nice crossover. And then, song titles, Water, Pleasure, which I got the message from that, as I recall, was one of like almost, saying like, look, the act of allowing ourselves the pleasures of life, there's this implicit underwoven part that says we might be causing some problems. I think about like you grab a plastic bottle of water and you enjoy that, but then you forget, you maybe quickly forget, well, where's this plastic bottle going after I'm done using it? That kind of thing.
Absolutely. Yeah. The abstraction of the consequences of like even the most everyday forms of pleasure. Checking your phone, is using a server somewhere that's plugged in to some power source. And
it's using a server in my brain too.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, but like, that was a time in my life where I think, and this happens for anyone who cares about the climate crisis, is like, it just sort of hits you in this wave of like overwhelming despair and panic. I've since found ways to move past that so that it doesn't paralyze me. But Pleasure was written at the height of that. I was like, everything I do every single day is like killing people across the world. Driving to work.
That's heavy, dude.
Getting takeout. Yeah, but I think that's like the reality of the times that we live in. And my only way of dealing with it is writing music.
Well, it's certainly, without a doubt, it's the reality of your experience and how it's affecting you, and the ability to take your personal experience and say, I'm going to take my personal experience and craft it into song and let it be the core of what I'm writing. I think that's a key element to creating and writing. And it's a hard thing to do sometimes, because we talked about like professionally engineering or writing and composing and being in a world where you're like, oh, other people are doing this style, I should do that. Same thing happens in writing, where it's like, if you, whatever message you think you might want to say lyrically in a song, I think it's very easy to be, for your personal message to be eclipsed by all the other messaging that's out there. And like, you might think, oh, I have to write a song that sounds like what this guy wrote over here,
Yeah, those forces are so strong. And so it takes effort to like shrug them off.
Yeah.
And do something that you actually want to do.
That's where the solo artist just sequestered in your own space can be, without distraction, without
sequester.
A huge...
You knew I would love the word sequester.
Without having the huge crew around. That's the moment for that, is like paying attention to yourself. I feel like that's the stuff that David Lynch is trying to teach in his book, and when he talks about transcendental meditation and how it benefits that, is like being open to what's internal coming up and coming out, and then respecting it and protecting it so that you can nurture it into some kind of creation,
Yeah, such a good observation. I'm glad you brought up this book because it's been a while since I've read it. And there's so much wisdom in that. It's a small book too. It's like,
it's really
like
easy
that,
to read.
It's like that gun in Men in Black, the tiny one that has like the most power out of all. I don't know if this reference is falling on deaf ears, but anyway, I feel like that book is similar. It's like very small and yet so powerful.
I mostly remember alien creatures around the office, and then that little flasher, the memory flasher thing they would stick in your face, which looked like a Royer 121 or like a pen or something.
Yeah. Wow. I had forgotten about that one. Well, but anyway, yeah, I'm glad you brought him up because he gets so much inspiration from places that aren't film. Like he's really into music. Wrote a crazy album called Crazy Clown Time.
Oh wow, I didn't know that.
It's pretty fun if you're feeling goofy and want to listen to something.
That means I have an excuse to have David Lynch on the podcast, doesn't it?
Oh man. I mean, now you have to do that.
Oh man, you heard it here, Rockstars.
Yeah. I was going to say, and to your point about, he does transcendental meditation and spends a lot of effort putting himself in a mental space where he can actually be kind to himself. And as you said, like nurture the ideas that come to him. And I find that's been increasingly relevant to me. It's like making sure I, exercise in the morning and, have a good meal and then come into the studio so that when I listen back to my stuff, I can be gentle with myself and acknowledge that what I did was actually okay. Because if you go in with a bad state of mind, then you could have written a masterpiece and you won't be generous enough with yourself to acknowledge it and you might kill the idea. So I think
it's such a funny thing. It's like, I think about the song sketches, those vulnerable initial moments, which are of course full of problems because you haven't really fleshed it out yet, and like, maybe there's lyrical things on there and ideas, or maybe there's playing or exploring a part that's a little too difficult for you at first, but you had the idea that it might be cool. And there are times where I listen back to something that I did like that, and I think, this is just a mess. What a disaster. And then there's times where I think, ooh, that sounds pretty cool. And then there's times where I'm feeling really in the moment, or I'm in the car and driving and I hear it and I'm like, oh, that's awesome. And I'm like, and there's none of that outside influence, crowding in the idea. And I can just dig it because I dig it, and it's hard to know, how do you balance all those? Like, which one do you go with? It's like, the moment I love the song the most, is that beer goggles? You know what I mean?
Which are important. That's an important data point.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think finding people too, a select group of people to whom you can show your music, and even regardless of their reaction, just simply having them in the room will change the way you hear it and hear it through their ears that you trust. I find that so important too.
Well, so you come into the studio in the morning and you've got your routine, which works well for you. When you come into the studio, you find the first thing you like to do is just sort of carefully listen to where you left off.
Yeah. I wish I had more of a routine on that part. I think there's always one track that I just can't take my mind off of, and whichever one that is, I'll come in and listen. I think recently I've just been trying to limit my time in the studio actually to really only come here when I feel like I can make progress. Because so often I come in here and I just listen through what I've written over and over and over again with no actual benefit.
Right.
And that's like a spiral I just really try to avoid now, because it not only is it not healthy, I think it actually gets your ears familiar to things that aren't necessarily good. And so you start to overlook things in the mix or in your writing that should be fixed or addressed, but because they're familiar, you sort of become numb to it. So I think actually limiting how many times you listen to your own work, for me, is becoming increasingly important.
It's fascinating because I agree with you. You can get wrapped up in appreciating what you've already done, and to your point, you're missing an opportunity to actually do something new, because you could be doing something instead of just listening to it. And yet at the same time, on a quantum, physics scale, there's this idea that even the act of listening is actually affecting and changing something, whatever that means. Sometimes that's just a fun thing to,
I love that idea. Yeah.
So it's an interesting dichotomy of those two things. And it's balance. It's all about balance. If you're ready to discover the secrets to making your mixes sound great, no matter what your studio situation, then check out my free mixing course, mixmasterbundle.com, where I show you how to get great sounding mixes in your studio using simple techniques and free plugins. And when you're ready for more advanced studio skills, then check out recordingstudiorockstars.com/academy, where you can learn from Grammy-winning teachers to help you record, edit, mix, and master your best record ever. Use the code ROCKSTAR right now at checkout for 10% off any course for a limited time. Now, I wanted to ask you something about your writing and your songs and your concept stuff too. Your music is not particularly, it's not like lyric driven in terms of lots of lyrics. So like, I don't remember which song I want to reference. Water, Pleasure, and No Solace were three, and The Great Derangement. Listening to those, I noticed that there might be a lot of music in the sort of classical composition. There might be a lot of music, and then along comes a moment of, maybe 4 lyrical phrases, and then we're back into music. And that probably is freeing in some ways, because you don't feel like you got to write, a rap song's worth of lyric content, or just something that's got lots in there. But maybe talk about that a little bit. Like, how do you balance what feels, what if you have no lyrics? Does it matter to you? How do you do those things? And that's you singing, right? Because you got a great singing voice.
That is me. Yeah. Thank you. Writing lyrics is the most arduous part of the process for me. I really struggle with it. I'm not a lyricist or a poet. So it's not really my wheelhouse. I love the voice as an instrument. And, often when I listen to other people's music, I don't hear the lyrics at all. All I hear is the sound that the voice is making.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't really care what they're saying. Unless the lyrics are, extraordinary. I'm usually not paying attention to them, for better or for worse. So when I'm writing lyrics, I pay most attention to how they're sounding. Like, what are the vowels that I'm using? And these are things that all lyricists think about. But I think I actively deprioritize the words until I get the sound right of the vocals, like the actual phonetics of what I'm saying, and then I'll build
how it fits.
Exactly. Yeah, and then I'll find the words around those sounds. As far as the sparseness of the vocals in my work, I just don't really feel the need to crowd my songs with a lot of words. I like to use vocals sparingly, I think, to create a slightly more mysterious sound and not to give the audience too much. And I think I just want the arrangement to breathe a little bit and let the instrumental shine through and let the vocals almost be supplementary. Because I'm a little bit, maybe this is my subconscious, but I just try to avoid the singer-songwriter complex, whereas
Right.
my voice and my lyrics and my singing need to be the focus. I mix my vocals pretty low in the mix. My mix engineer, who's an extremely talented collaborator of mine, his name's Zach Moses. We'll probably talk about him later as we talk about
Cool.
mixing. But it's this constant battle we have where, he tries to boost my lyrics in the mixes, which ends up yielding better results because I mix them definitely too quietly, but I always try to tamp them back down.
You're an indie rocker at heart, man.
I'm an indie rocker at heart, I guess.
You're a shoegazer at heart.
Oh, man. Yeah. But
yeah, well, I think it's cool. I mean, a thought that comes to mind for me too is in film composition, the music is often benefiting the visual by adding emotional context, but the music itself in the lyric is rarely the story. The image is the story. So maybe, some of that informs the way that you compose too, where, you've got these incredible videos. So Rockstars, we've got links in the show notes. Please make sure to go check it out. There's a playlist of music, but there's also links to arswainofficial.com, which has got these videos on it that you're producing. Who is Index Thumb, and why is Index Thumb such a badass at making these videos?
Yeah, I'm so glad.
Yeah, talk about the video production and all that. Like particularly No Solace, the first one on there, is just. I'm watching it and I'm thinking, man, I wish this was like a blockbuster film that I could just turn on for the next 2 hours.
Oh, I'm so glad you brought this up. So Index Thumb is my dear friend and film collaborator, Willow Hamilton, who lives in Berlin. And the two of us went to college together. And yeah, they are an extremely talented, relentlessly creative and imaginative filmmaker. It was actually after I left Remote Control that Willow and I traveled to Iceland together as sort of a quasi road trip, but also work trip to film content for my upcoming album. And both of us had just, Willow was falling in love, and I was actually falling out of love. I had just gotten out of a 3-year relationship. So both of us were pretty banged up. And we went on this 4-day excursion through Iceland shooting what became No Solace, which for anyone listening is a 12-minute short film featuring a medley of 3 songs from my album Partitioning. So that was a really special time. We shot in these beautiful landscapes, and
so that's you. You're the figure that we see walking on the snow, and
that's me. Yep, right. That's me.
And your whole studio's in the backpack, which you've discarded onto the ground.
That's right. Yeah. Yep, just my laptop, and no. Well, I do have a portable studio, which we could talk about later.
Oh, dude, we got so much to talk about, but this is great. I don't think we're not wasting a moment here. So let's keep telling us about that. So the film itself has some really incredible visual effects too. And I know we're not a video podcast, but I think it's important for us to remember the power of creating these music videos to accompany the music we do. And I think it's also important for us to remember that our music isn't always a thing just solo on its own. It's kind of like collaborating and working with other people. Our music is it's just part of a fabric of experience, whether it's with visual, whether it's live in a place, whether it's, best for driving and listening, all those things.
Absolutely. I mean, everyone knows that when you hear a record, you associate it with the place that either you first heard it or maybe a place where you heard it and really hit you. I mean, we all know that like music is deeply associative and often tied to imagery. So I think it was really important for Willow and I to make this video content because I think both of us cared about associating the music with a very particular kind of imagery. And that's why it was so fun to make No Solace, is because Willow just like totally understood where I was coming from with, everything surrounded climate change. We have similar taste in film and music. So there's just a shared intuition about what this album needed to look like. And I think anytime you can control what your album looks like, what the music actually looks like in people's mind's eye, whether that's album artwork or music videos, like the more you can do that, I think the better. because it, as you said, it adds to that holistic experience that people get from your album. So yeah, and then Willow also made an incredible video called was With Ease is the name of the track, where they shot another friend of ours, Anna Chavrabov. Basically, the video is unpacking an Amazon box, and there's actually nothing in the box. The video becomes Anna fetishizing the sensation of it's receiving a box from Amazon that is the dopamine rush. It's not necessarily what's in the box, because we order toilet paper. Like, no one really cares what they get. I think just like simply seeing a package at your door is like what gives you the thrill. So it's like, it's kind of like a sexual fetishization of what it means to receive an Amazon box. And that's something only Willow could have come up with. And it's why I look to them for inspiration, because I know that like Willow just has the tools, the creative tools to like bring the idiosyncrasies out of my music and turn it into something totally different. So,
well, I love that there is an opportunity like that for you guys to artistically collaborate, where it's like your music is, instead of another musician to make your music, it's a videographer and a film producer, and it's that interaction that informs the film, informs the music, and moves both of them forward. Gosh, what was I going to ask you about? I think just in this context of putting your music out there, making sure that you present your music in a careful and considerate way to your fans, to an audience, to the world, and that you're considering the look, the visual, the artwork that goes with it, the packaging, or no packaging, the video stuff, and how important that is, and how important it also is to really make an effort and be proactive with releasing your music, something I'm extremely guilty of not doing as a musician myself.
Oh, are you sitting on like 300 ideas right now?
I'm sitting on finished records that have never seen the light outside of the band that made them, might making music with friends and stuff like that. So I'm always thinking like, that's on my you gotta list. Come on, Lidge, you gotta release the record. You gotta put it out there. But briefly, let's get into your professional efforts at actually promoting your music and putting it out there. And I'll be transparent, and I will say that you came across my radar through your promotional assistant, your music promoter, Lindsay, at I don't have it right in front of me, but what is her?
The Scorpion.
The Scorpion,
Limited.
Yes, thank you. The Scorpion Limited. And thank you for contacting me, Lindsay, because usually as a recipient, I might get a lot of incoming stuff, and it's mostly junk, right? Mm-hmm. It's just the nature of being in a position like I'm at. But in your case, I clicked through and checked it out, and I was really struck by what you do. And I think that the way it was presented was done well too. So now here we are. That's an important thing. I think that's important for the rock stars to understand, listening too, that there is an effort of getting, presenting your music and your work to the world. So enough about me, enough of my voice. What would you like to say about that, Freddie? Talk about how you like to make sure that your music's actually reaching the world. And maybe this is the beginning of that process for you, or maybe you've been doing it successfully for quite a while.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate your transparency about, how this all came together. I think that often gets glossed over in conversations like these. And I think those details are super important for people to hear. As far as music promotion goes, I think I learned very quickly just how freaking hard it is to get your stuff out there. Yeah. I think anyone who spends too much time thinking about the challenge of that might not even make records to begin with, just because it's such a daunting task. So I very quickly learned that I needed help, and that music promotion, it's just not like, if you write masterpieces, like, it doesn't necessarily mean you're good at promoting your music. In fact, sometimes those impulses are diametrically opposed. So I knew I needed help, and I linked up with a publicist and who's now sort of my de facto manager. His name is Jason Duarte. And he works with Lindsay, from whom you heard about me. And he's just been so helpful in, getting me write-ups and connecting me with fantastic people like you, Lidge. And I couldn't do it without him. And it makes me more excited to continue writing music, knowing that I have someone in my corner.
Right.
Like in the same sense that I have Willow in my corner to make visual content to accompany my music, Jason's just doing a different role, and it happens to be on the business side of things. And I think similar to what we were talking about with film scoring, how there's this illusion of the solitary artist. It's always a team.
Right.
So, I pay Jason a monthly fee, and he goes to work for me, and I couldn't be happier because now I just get to do what I do best, which is actually like make the thing.
Yeah.
I understand everyone's financial resources are different. So, especially at the onset of a project, paying someone to help you out isn't always realistic. Mm-hmm. But, whatever way you can outsource that process, I think is not only helpful, but can be like mentally soothing so that you don't have to like worry about any of that.
Now you're in Los Angeles, you're in, if anybody even imagined the idea of a manager, they would probably first think like, oh, New York or Los Angeles, probably Los Angeles first. So like you're in the heart of the part of the world where that sort of thing exists. For people who are outside of that, who are in totally different places, have you heard good examples of other people in, non-major markets who have found effective ways to team up with publicists or promotion and things like that? And if you haven't, that's fine. But if you've got any good anecdotes or stories or suggestions for somebody who's not in a major hub, it'd be great.
Totally. I think what I will say is that, Jason and I have never met. Jason lives on the East Coast. And so
nice.
We've been collaborating this entire time remotely. And I wouldn't attribute our working relationship to the fact that I live in Los Angeles. I think I could live anywhere and it would have happened. So I think that if you find a good fit, whether it's a manager or publicist, someone who truly understands your sound and who your audience is, I think it can work from any geographic location. But I think, again, it's like finding the right fit, someone who like really knows who you are and not just a generic publicity service or a manager who doesn't really get your sound. It's just, you got to have stuff in common.
OWC now brings you the Mini Stack STX, the world's first Thunderbolt 4 certified storage and hub expander, perfectly sized to stack with the Mac Mini, and the ideal storage and connectivity companion for Thunderbolt or USB-equipped computers and devices. With a SATA HDD SSD bay and NVMe M.2 PCIe SSD slot, you can expand your Mini's storage capacity to gigantic proportions. 3 Thunderbolt USB-C ports enable you to connect to millions of Thunderbolt, USB, and future USB 4 drives, displays, AV mixers, cameras, and tablets, as well as desktop accessories like a keyboard, card reader, or mouse. I'm using the Mini Stack STX paired with my Mac Mini M1 to house my dedicated audio SSD and sample libraries at my studio, and it works great. Find the new Mini Stack STX and all your storage needs at macsales.com/rockstars. The STX 100D from the Spectra 1964 Custom Shop is the big brother to the now famous STX 100. A fully discrete mic pre with dual transformer isolated Spectra 101 amplifiers, the STX 100D is exactly the same original circuit found in Stax, Ardent, Advision, A&M, and Record Plant recording consoles. The sonic performance is identical. Best of all, it will plug into a single space of your standard 500 500 lunchbox. And if you want to add the sound of the famous Spectra C610 complementer, then check out the new STX 600 modules, combining the STX 100 mic pre and C610 into a single 500 module. Now you can get the same incredible sound in your studio that worked for famous producers like Tom Dowd with the STX mic pre's BBDI and complementers. Go to spectra1964.com or call 801-797-0642. Hey, Rockstars, we're back now for the jam session, aka the second half of the show. My guest today is Freddy Avis of the band Arswain, joining us from Los Angeles. Freddie, are you ready to jam? Jam.
Let's jam away.
Sweet. All right, enough philosophy. Let's dig into the studio, man. Let's talk about what you're doing. So, Rockstars, again, the music, as I would describe it very generally, is very artistic, electronic, very cinematic, great use of spaces and reverbs and distortions and weird vocal treatments and stuff that just takes you to another place. And so I'd love to talk to you about that. Let me begin by saying, tell us about your studio. Are you joining us from your studio now? And what are some of the tools that you're surrounded by?
I am. I'm joining you from Lemon Tree Studios in Highland Park. I've been leasing a room here for almost 3 years now. I love these studios because they already have sound treatment on the wall, which is huge. Not only convenience, but also financially, just saves me, the work of acoustically treating my room.
Nice.
In my studio, I have a table to my left that's decked out with a bunch of synths, some modular, some semi-modular, and then I have a table with my computer and my video computer, which I use for film scoring, to project on the TV in front of me. I use a 49-inch Samsung monitor that's curved, one of those like big gaming monitors, which are kind of fun. I have a pair of ATC SCM12s as my monitors. And then to my right, I have my guitars. And that's pretty much it.
So wait, what were the monitors again? The speakers?
The ATC SCM12s.
Yeah. Nice.
Yeah, passive.
Oh, and then what's your, do you use a particular amp with that?
Yes, it's underneath, but I forget.
Honestly,
forget the name of it.
Actually, I like those answers because it's like, well, it sounds, whatever you got probably sounds pretty damn good.
Yeah, it works for me.
Yeah. Okay, very cool. And then you do the curved screen, which I've seen those. I've never worked on one of those. But is that's sort of right in front of you between the speakers, or how do you position that where all these things go together the best for you?
Correct. Yeah, it's right in front of me. To be honest, I'm thinking of redesigning this particular part of my setup because
who isn't at any given time?
Yeah.
Right?
Well, this is actually kind of it's a very serious problem as far as recording studio problems go. But
right.
It's a really wide monitor that's actually not too tall, which works because I can still see the TV in front of me when I'm scoring a cut, for instance.
Right.
But what happens is, in order to have a direct line to my speakers, they actually have to be spread pretty far apart. So my stereo image is like super wide. And what's happening is a lot of the low end is just going right by me. And I have to stand at the back of the room to check low end. From where I'm sitting and actually writing, I'm actually not getting the very low end. And that's a problem right now. Like I'm
definitely familiar with that experience in the past. I've recently had a great solution, but I know exactly what that feels like most of the time.
Yeah, it's just kind of concerning because you're constantly paranoid about what's actually happening sonically. I've learned to kind of write around it, and then I'll periodically get up and stand at the back of the room. But I'm thinking about getting a subwoofer or maybe moving my desk back, getting a different monitor so my monitors can be closer together. Maybe that'll change things. I'm just sort of experimenting right now.
Whoops. Well, I can tell you what I did, and you might find it interesting. I'm working with studio designer Carl Tatz, and he put in a Phantom Focus system in my studio, and it's awesome. It's amazing. I mean, your records sound so cool on it. But it gives you the ability to have right at this where you're sitting at the mix position, it's accurate from 20 to 20 so that you get the full spectrum. I still go to the back of the room because I feel like sometimes hearing the exaggerated frequencies is giving me insight too, because it's nice to compare something I'm doing to another record and be like, oh, that other record, the exaggerated frequencies aren't so exaggerated if I'm in the back of the room on the couch or something. Mm-hmm. But a pretty cool thing. But one of the challenges of doing the Phantom Focus setup is that there can't be anything in between the speakers. So it has to be a big screen that's on the back wall behind them a little bit. And that works for me, but sometimes I think, oh, it'd be nice to just have the screen right up front where my reading glasses could be on and I see it at the right mm-hmm. distance kind of thing.
Yeah, totally. Unfortunately, that's not an option for me. I have to have this big TV monitor right in front of me. If it were just me writing my own records, I would ditch the TV and the problem would be solved in an instant. But there's this
because
visual,
you have to see the film at the same time.
Exactly. And I have to see it from the angle at which I'm sitting, which it just creates this whole other set of parameters. So
that's fascinating.
Anyway.
Well, the future holds interesting things, at some point we may just be in some sort of virtual goggles where you just effortlessly see whatever you need to see right in front of you. And we don't have to stress over that anymore, but we'll see when we get there.
Yeah. Well, we all know Zuckerberg is designing the metaverse specifically for recording engineers and musical artists.
Right. That's exactly why he's got our best interest at heart. I just know
right. We are at front of mind for him.
It's such a lovable plastic smiling face. How could it be anything else? Okay, cool. So you said you have your synths over to the side. You've got modular and semi-modular. Geek out on that just a little bit. What do those things mean to the rock stars?
Yeah. So would it be helpful to say exactly what I have?
Sure. Yeah, sure. But feel free to describe some of the basics of it too for people so they understand what these things mean.
Sure. Yeah. So these synthesizers that I have are for the most part semi-modular, which means that the way that they're configured is such that I don't need to do a ton of patching to make them sound cool. They already come ready to go and mm-hmm. make some pretty awesome stuff. Some examples of those semi-modular synths and some of my favorites are the Make Noise Strega, which just came out last year. It's amazing. Also have the Make Noise No Coast, and I just got this really cool other it's like an ambient texture synth called the Solar 50 by Elta Music. It's a Russian synth company.
Cool.
But the cool thing is that it's the perfect combination of plug and play and also patchability if you do want to get more ambitious with your sound design and get a little weirder. So I love those synths because I just feel, I think synths are so much about how they make you feel. If you mm-hmm. feel compelled to use them and really dive deep into them, you're going to make better stuff. But having a Moog, for instance, doesn't really interest me because I don't find Moogs all that interesting. So that's just me personally.
Well, I've been getting into synths a lot more this year. I got, I sort of the Behringer, stuff was catching my eye and I ended up getting the Model D and the Pro 1, which is sort of modeled after the Moog, and then the sequential circuits. And I guess those are semi-modular synths, right?
Yeah. Those are great.
And a way to think about what semi-modular means, Rockstars, is you still got to plug a keyboard into it to play some notes. But within the synth, there are, there's a tone generator, there's an LFO, there's a filter section, and maybe a mixer. And all those things are sort of pre-connected inside so that you can press a note and hopefully you get a sound out the other end. Not always.
Yeah. Sometimes you have to work a little bit. But I think that element of even just putting in a little bit of effort is what yields the most interesting results because you never know when happy mistakes are going to happen.
Well, also, I just feel like I'm more inclined to dial in the sound. If I was playing a guitar with guitar pedals, I'm going to immediately reach for the pedals and start sculpting the sound until it feels right coming out of my fingers. And I find with an analog synthesizer, it's easier to do that. You can do it with a digital synth, of course, but something about doing a mouse to make those adjustments doesn't, I just don't do the same moves or something. And then I also have this one called the Behringer DeepMind, which is, has even more stuff in it, like effects and everything. And it's like the more complex it gets, the more scared you are about making a change to something, I feel like.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, it's a miracle that you got it to sound the way it does and you like don't want to mess with it.
Yeah.
I also say like, I think what I seek a lot of the time in these types of tools, especially modular synths or semi-modular synths, is an element of randomness, like conceding control away from me and letting a machine kind of do a lot of the heavy lifting. I think randomness is kind of what I crave now in terms of the tools that I use. So for instance, I have one of my modules in my modular setup is this thing called the Morphogene, also made by Make Noise.
Nice.
And it's like this randomizer granulator that makes these incredible textures that you can never predict. I also have this thing called, I forgot who made it, but it's called the Stereo Field. It's really cool looking. I encourage listeners to look it up. It's basically a gold plate, and you can run audio through it or not at all. It can self-generate. And basically all you do is you move your fingers around these gold plates and it creates this circuit between the plates and your body. And that circuitry creates these crazy textures that are like totally spontaneous and you never know what they're going to do. And it's like,
so it's sort of affecting the sound that you put into this thing?
Totally. Yeah. You can morph a sound coming into it. Or you can just use it as a standalone instrument and it creates these like glitches and like
That's
zaps.
Great.
So stuff like that, I think is like magical because I like all I have to do is play and I don't have to worry about controlling anything.
Yeah. And again, it's like the beauty of using analog stuff. If you're going to use digital stuff, you can get fancier by having controllers, but those can be more complicated to hook up well sometimes. But using analog stuff, it's all, you have to control it. And it becomes, I feel like it just involves us more as a creator. We're making a move musically and then instinctively by turning a knob or adjusting something or doing something, and that interaction is where all the fun stuff comes from. Let's talk a little bit about like when you turn to all these tools, how would you describe the sorts of musical bits that come out of them that you then use in your production? Do we think about those as tools to turn to for an instrument part that's going to play a particular melody? Do we think about them as something to turn to for percussion elements? Do we think about them to turn to as like these, things that kind of create an atmosphere around what we're doing?
I think it usually results in two outcomes, and they're two very different outcomes. The first one is I'm looking for like the main idea, like the main kernel. It could be a synth riff. It could be a loop. And from that idea, I build out the whole song. The other outcome is kind of the opposite. It's all the little textural ornamental stuff that comes at the end of the writing process to fill in the gaps, add a sense of spontaneity, put the sounds in a world, like a glitchy, kind of noisy world.
Yeah.
I think ornamental is kind of the best way to put that second outcome. So I'm never really sequencing the synths to a clock or a tempo. It's usually just press record, plug and play, see what happens. And then chop up the audio afterwards and play with it.
Yeah, I want to keep going on that topic because I think that's a critical one for how to do this stuff too. But that's cool to hear you describe it that way. When you ornamental is a word that gets used a lot, and I've actually, once again, I'm going to reveal the time frame at which I'm doing this interview, I have yet to take down the Christmas tree. So it's about to come down soon. But, I think
It's
about the
February.
ornaments on there. I know. And this will come out later, of course. But rock stars know that about me and the way I do these already. So you just finished an awesome mix and sent it off to the band, but the singer texts you with lyric changes, the drummer emails you wanting a different fill, and the bass player DMs you on Instagram about a wrong note in the chorus. But which mix version are they talking about anyway? Don't you wish there was an easier way? Samply.app comes to the rescue as your ultimate mix assistant, streaming high-quality mixes so your clients can easily listen and send notes from their mobile phone on the road or a computer back in the studio. All mix comments are time-stamped directly onto the correct mix version with no confusion, and everything is easy to find in one location. No more mixed-up mix messages from the band. It's file sharing that was specifically built for music, and it all works in your browser with no downloads required. Sign up for your free account with 2 projects now at Samply.app and use the coupon code RSR20 to get 20% off the first 3 months when you're ready to upgrade. Have you ever wished you could remove the click track bleed from a singer's vocal mic, the sound of shuffling feet from a full choir, or clicking noises from the valves of an otherwise brilliant trumpet solo? These are just some of the incredible things I've been able to clean up, edit, or remove from a recording using the magic of iZotope RX. Great for mixing with a collection of plugins for your DAW to manage plosives, clicks, S's, noise, buzz, reverb, breaths, and even guitar fret squeaks with a set it and forget it simplicity that lets you focus on your creativity in the studio while you let iZotope handle the audio challenges. If you've ever wanted to truly feel like a magician in the studio, then iZotope RX is your magic wand. Try out the subscription option with an extended 30-day free trial at iZotope.com/rockstars or use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off any individual plugin purchase. The concept of ornamental, and I'm sort of inclined to think about it almost like when you're doing the music and you're working with index thumb and you're making these films. I prefer to think about the sounds that come from the synths as almost like the lighting on your music. It's like it's like creating the mood and the sense of place that surrounds it too.
Absolutely. I don't know how you feel, but when I enter that stage of the process where it's, the general idea of the song has been written, and now it's time to add all the, I guess we're going to keep using this word, ornaments. It's so hard and it feels so tedious. And yet, it's like probably one of the most important aspects of the song, because without it, it would just sound plain and mundane and written in a DAW. It's odd now that we have to like manufacture putting stuff in a quote unquote world. Whereas before, that world would just come from imperfect technology, whether it's a hum in the room or imperfect miking, or, the character that we now seek has to be like manufactured in a digital space, which is kind of odd. But nevertheless, we have to do it.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I agree with you. There's a thing about the digital too, where sounds are almost, they really are. They're almost too perfect, too clean, too much extension of the frequency from the lows to the highs. And we need to take it back to a real world, or a world we're familiar with, I guess. It's sort of funny. It's like music came out of this place where those things happen normally. And you'd think, oh, if we could only do this over here. And then you get the tools to do this over here with doing everything with plugins and in the box, but you still need to bring it back. So it's like music has always been in the same place all along,
Oh my God,
what sounds right to us has always been, a certain thing. And we're just trying to get it to there from wherever we're finding ourselves.
Have you read any Mark Fisher by any chance?
No, not yet.
Okay, yeah. Well, he has this book called Ghosts of My Life, and he writes about, he sort of takes on this nostalgia culture in music now where like everything is throwback. It's so ubiquitous now, but he talks about how, the 21st century, the new technology has mostly affected the distribution of music and not really the creative tools with which we make music. Like now we just have digital mock-ups of like all the Universal Audio stuff and all these like quote unquote vintage
Right.
plugins, but like they're really just the same as what's been around for the last 50 or 60 years. And he points to that as sort of this problem of modern music making, is that like what tools do we have that are like genuinely new? And when you think about it that way, it's like, oh, I guess all plugins are kind of mock-ups of everything that's been around for decades. So,
well, I mean, then there's also the aspect of what it means, what music is, how you define what the ear hears out of a note. You know, you've got like things that are related to time. You've got things that are related to frequency. You've got things that are related to, well, I guess this is time related, you know, things that are echoing or repeating or reverb. You know, all these elements go into making sound for us. And you can change the look of a way to do those things, but and it could be an old piece of gear that does it, or it could be a brand new, freaky looking plugin that doesn't look like anything, but they might still be doing the same kind of stuff. But there's so maybe that's part of it, is discovering, you know, like, are there new ways to treat sound? There certainly are things like the ability to, you know, with AI kind of stuff, to dissect and deconstruct sounds, to morph things. Actually, that brings us to one of the questions I wanted to ask you about as far as tools go. X for Serum and wavetable synthesis and things like that. Those do a really interesting job of that. What is it called? Dang it. It's not called conflating. Convolution. Where you're sort of morphing different sounds together to create new things. Those strike me as new tools, newish, you know?
Sure. Yeah. Like different forms of synthesis.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, I cheat and I usually build a lot of my sounds from presets. Cause I don't have the patience to, most of my original sound design happens with hardware, with all the synths we talked about, but with plugins. And to your point earlier about like, you know, clicking a mouse to design sounds just like isn't fun to me. It just doesn't feel good. And, you know, Massive and Serum and, you know, what are other,
yeah, keep going. That's one of my questions, is like, just give us a bunch of cool
Silent,
you know,
Zebra,
synths.
Spire, you know, all these incredible, all the Arturia stuff is amazing. But to actually like use or make full use of those plugins and harness the entirety of the sound outcomes that it offers, it takes a lot of clicking and a lot of like potential carpal tunnels.
Yeah.
So,
well, here's the one way I think about it. It takes a lot of dedicated time that doesn't feel at all like you're using the other part of your brain, the management, you know, shuffling digital papers around part of your brain, as opposed to doing those things tactily, is that the right word? With your hands on an analog synth. It's like your brain is thinking about the music, and you might have to think about like, oh, if I patch this into that, there's certainly some of that. But otherwise, you know, your hands are just feeling stuff and you're stumbling on it. And I think that feels a little different to me. Yet at the same time, I'm so freaking fascinated by stuff like Serum, Massive, all these, what's possible and capable of all these plugins, you know, and it's just fascinating, man. I don't know. I don't even know what to ask about it.
Yeah,
Just keep riffing.
So many possibilities with those pieces of software. And I definitely use them. I think if I were to sound design from scratch in a plugin, I would use Massive. That's the one I'm most comfortable in and makes the most sense to me. But
have you seen some digital controllers that seem to do a really good job of interfacing with these? And have you put in the time with your MIDI controller to route things and map them, and then found that worked, or that could, you know, that 6 months from now when you go to make a sound, it's still mapping properly and all that kind of stuff?
You know, that's a good point to bring up. I haven't tried that with VSTs in particular. You know, I have CC controls for a lot of the samples that I use, expression mod, volume, and it really helps for string writing and
Right.
dynamics with all the orchestral libraries that I use for film scoring. So we can talk about that later. But in terms of, it's actually a really good idea. I'm sure there are some great controls out there that would help me, for instance, use Serum more effectively and make it more fun.
Well, I mean, I've got like the launch key, 66 or something like that. And it's, expansive keyboard. It's got the drum pads on it. It's got faders on it. It's got knobs on it. And it's capable of routing to stuff. And I have messed with it. But again, it's like that question of what am I going to set up that I'm going to use enough that when I go to use it tomorrow, it's still connected, it still works. I still remember how to do it. Those are always the challenges for me. And when you use hardware outboard stuff, like you can't change the knobs on your on your Striga or your Strega, it's still going to be there. So you can just grab the knobs and go. But cool stuff. Oh yeah. Let's talk about the strings. So you were talking about CC controllers. So Rockstars, that stands for, what does that stand for? CC. It's MIDI. It's controller something control.
I'm frankly embarrassed that I'm blanking on this.
It's all right, man. This stuff was written in the 70s, and then it just carries through to now, and we use the same language for it.
I definitely know this, but anyway,
ultimately it means you can take the knobs and faders and you can assign them to different stuff on the virtual synthesizer or the sample player and control things that would be more naturally easy to control if you were playing an actual violin, for example. So what are some of the things that come to mind for you as far as do we want to have 3 controller foot pedals on the ground? Do we want to just have a little fader on the MIDI keyboard, and that our right hand is playing the musical part, but our left hand is adjusting certain faders on there?
Yeah, you obviously know this world very well because that's how a lot of film composers work. Everyone's different. Some people use foot pedals. Some people use key switching with their left hand and playing with the right, which means like the lowest C is legato and then lowest D is staccato. And you use your left hand to control the articulations while you play the part live. Some people like to work that way.
Oh, interesting.
That's sort of a moderately old school way of doing it, as in like maybe 10, 15 years ago, that was the dominant way to do it. My setup is one that I learned from remote, which is you play the part with the right hand, and then you have either a fader master, which is an extremely overpriced piece of equipment, but a lot of people use it. Or you can just find a basic CC controller. There are plenty of alternatives. And what I have on that CC controller are 3 parameters. And the first one is expression, which is CC, 11. And then modulation on the second one, which is CC1. And volume, which is CC7. And if those codes sound dumb and scary to people, they are. Like, don't worry about memorizing those. They don't matter. Right. But
I mean, you're listing the 3 basic ones, and part of the point of mentioning it is Rockstars. There are so MIDI comes out of a keyboard, and it's basically telling the computer or the other synthesizer that's receiving the MIDI input. It's telling it things like start of note, how long you're holding it down for, when you let go of it. Other things like mine actually has, what do they call it? Compressor or whatever. So if you press harder on the keys afterwards, it sends that information.
Yeah, aftertouch.
Aftertouch. Thank you. So that could add more intensity to a sense. So that all MIDI is it's just a bunch of controlling data going to the instrument. And there are all sorts of like unused CC controller numbers that you could assign to a bunch of stuff. And then there are the ones that Freddy's mentioning that are like very common and typically already assigned to something, so that if you learn those ones, then you can kind of make sure that you at least have the basics for expression in an instrument.
That's right. And all these fancy string libraries come pre-mapped to those CCs. So it's...
What are the players that let you play the fancy string libraries? Is it like Contact or something? Or
yeah, I'm all Contact.
You are? Okay.
Yeah.
Give us a brief introduction to the rockstars who aren't using Contact yet. What is that?
Contact is a sampler plugin that's sort of the industry standard, not sort of, is the industry standard for sample libraries, specifically in film scoring. There are a few alternatives like Play, which is made by East West, and Arcade by Output, which is a sort of new sampler. But anyway, Kontakt is the main one. And what Kontakt does is it loads audio samples. You can either do it manually by dragging audio in, and then you can play that audio file on the keyboard. Or it does it automatically with libraries that have already been structured and programmed such that you can just plop them into Kontakt, and they're like already elaborately designed to be played on a keyboard.
So Kontakt, that's Native Instruments, and that is a plugin you can install, and it's essentially the shell player for any of the sample libraries that you can go purchase and load into it.
That's right.
The way to think of it.
Yeah, and there's even a free version called Kontakt Player, which is like the very basic elements of Kontakt if you don't want to spend money on Kontakt.
Oh, I see. Okay, so you can buy sort of the fancier player. But when you load Kontakt, does it automatically load up with like an enormous sample library every single time, or do you sort of go and just pick and choose what instrument you feel like loading up into it, and now you just go ahead and start playing?
Any good sample library will have both options. So you can load individual articulations. Say you want to have just the legato or just the staccato. You can just load those in and not take up too much RAM on your computer. Or some offer the option where it like loads the whole thing, and then you can like switch articulations in real time. So there's a design element, which depending on what kind of composer you are and what kind of computer you have, you'll choose different options. But usually, all the biggest string libraries like Spitfire and, Cinematic Strings and all that, they'll give you a lot of options.
Okay, so then would you use Kontakt if you were about to write a drum part? Or would you be using something else? Okay.
Yeah. There are a lot of great percussion libraries that use Kontakt. Basically, anything can be programmed into Kontakt. I think guitars and solo vocals are historically the ones that are most difficult to make into sample libraries, but there's still some good ones out there.
Yeah, interesting. Do you want to record killer drums in your home studio? Rockstars of Drums will show you how to record, edit, and mix pro-sounding drums with examples from a Nashville session drummer in a Grammy-winning studio. Do you want to know how to master your own music at home? Rockstars of Mastering will show you how with plugins in your DAW so that your music will sound awesome when you finish your mixes. And if you're looking for a step-by-step solution for a pro-sounding mix that won't take years to learn, the Ultimate Mixing Masterclass with Craig Alvin will show you a proven method for creating Grammy-winning quality mixes that you can apply in your home studio right now. Or if you just need to learn the fundamentals of creating a great sounding mix, then register for my free course Mixmaster Bundle to get great mixes using simple, free plugins. And get started now making your best record ever at recordingstudiorockstars.com/academy. Use the code ROCKSTAR at checkout to get 10% off any course for a limited time. I recently got a battery. But that's
also Native Instruments
too, right? Yeah. And that's a really cool plugin for just loading up lots of drum stuff and using it. But I mean, it's a good reminder to us so often where we begin. Like it kind of doesn't matter what sample player you use. We're going to be doing such a basic, building a beat or something like that we could use just about anything, and it wouldn't matter. But as you get more complex with it. Mm-hmm. And expressive, then these different tools can be good for that. But then if you were going to do a bass part, you would make a bass track, you'd load Kontakt onto that, load the bass library, and that's all that would be on that one. And then when you go do a string part, that's a separate track with a new instance of Kontakt and a different library loaded in.
Correct. I think this is a good opportunity to sort of describe my template to people for film scoring.
Yeah, great.
So I use Cubase. I use Cubase for film scoring. I use Ableton for all my other writing stuff just because I think Ableton's a more creative DAW. But for film scoring, I use Cubase because Cubase has some design components that make it very well suited for having a large template with a huge variety of instruments while not taxing your computer too much. And the way that Cubase does that, I think Logic can do this now too, is that, you can have, in my case, I have 4,000 tracks in my template, but they're all deactivated. They're all deactivated because Cubase has an activate, deactivate feature where you can load instruments as you go so that you don't have all four. If I had all 4,000 of those tracks loaded, my computer would die.
Even if you were using the new Mac Mini M1?
Yeah, even if I had a terabyte of memory, it just wouldn't work. So the great thing about Cubase is that you can have all the flexibility and variety of having like a professional grade template with thousands of tracks, but you're mostly only going to use, anywhere between 20 and 50 instruments per piece of music. So all you need to do is load those ones, and those will be the only ones that are loaded into memory.
So I dig that. A quick takeaway is you're not making a new track, loading a plugin in, pulling up the plugin menu or the preset menu and like hunting around for stuff. This is more like, that this style of bass is right here, just enable it, bam, there you go. You can adjust it from there. And it's probably a lot quicker to work that way.
I wish I could show you my template because it would show you just how insane it is. But for my string section, I have every library that I have in different sections. Within those sections, I have every single articulation already made into a track. And all I have to do, if I want a certain library with a certain articulation, is I just enable that particular track and I start writing on it. So I never have to create new tracks or duplicate them or find plugins and load them. Everything's already ready to go. Now, of course, making that template was like a very arduous process that took...
Yeah, it took you 500 years.
Honestly, it only took me like 3 straight days of just like hammering it out. And now it's set and I've been using it for years ever since.
That's cool. So Rockstars, this is, of course, your opportunity. If you would like me to try and tempt Freddy to, do a YouTube live stream with me or something someday, now's your chance to drop in your comments saying, yes, please show us your template.
I'd be happy to do it. Honestly, I think if I could just take a little bit of a step back, I think you asked earlier what my takeaways were from remote control when I first started working there. Honestly, my big takeaway was that to be a great composer, I'd say not a whole lot of it has to do with your musical ability. And that might sound cynical, and I might not be correct in saying that, but I think that's just a way to emphasize the point that so much of your success as a composer has to do with simply the access you have to tools. Whether that's different sample libraries that, aren't cheap, that you need to acquire over the years to make your mock-ups sound really good, or having a computer that's strong enough to handle 50 tracks loaded in a session so that you can have the kind of creative flexibility that you have. It's like, I just really want to emphasize this point on like, there's so much musical talent out there and there's so many geniuses who never get the light of day and never get to work in film scoring simply because they like either don't have access to the tools or aren't aware of them. And then once you're aware of them, like all of a sudden you could score a Marvel movie and it's like not a big deal.
Wow. That's cool, man. Well, all right. Tell us about your computer. What have you learned that you need to have just so that all this stuff will function for you?
Yeah. So I have, there's this company in Nashville actually called PC Audio Labs. And they make custom computers for musicians. I have, what's called a Rockbox 10, I think is the model. And it's a laptop actually with 4 internal drives. All are solid state drives for those who are interested in that. And it has 64 gigs of RAM. So anyway, all that is to say, it's like basically a desktop computer confined into a laptop. And that's great.
And it's got 4 drives inside the laptop. That's
inside the laptop. So I have no external drives. When I travel, I just take my laptop and I'm ready to go.
How big do those drives need to be for you?
Internally?
Yeah. Are they like 2 terabytes each, or are they like 10 terabyte drives? Yeah.
They're two 2 terabytes and 2 4 terabytes.
Nice.
Yeah.
And then you would, some of the way to think about why you would need 4 drives. Does each drive typically have a different task?
Exactly. So I have the main boot drive, which has all my software, and that's, where the computer boots from. And then I have a sessions drive where all my Ableton and Cubase sessions are. I have a samples drive where all my samples are, and an audio drive where I export all my bounces to.
Okay, cool. And then how often is it important to have the samples duplicated inside the session folder versus not doing that and just having one version of that sample over on the other drive?
Oh, well, for samples, everything stays on the sample drive, so nothing gets duplicated. Everything just draws from there. With audio, if I import any audio into the session, I like to have it duplicated such that everything I need for that session is contained in the session folder, if that makes sense.
Right.
So it's not like drawing from random places on the computer.
So like once the sample might live on the sample drive, but once you're ready to commit that track, now it's in the session folder.
Correct. Yeah, if the sample is being used within a plugin, it'll just stay on the samples drive.
Right.
But yeah,
I think if you print an audio track, now it's in the session. Yeah.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, that's good because I mean, I don't know if there are really great reasons to leave the sample on the sample drive or to have it in the session, but if you did think you needed to have all those samples in the session, it can make your sessions bigger, make your session folder much bigger, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Doing sort of maintenance on your session drive is something I need to do more. But
yeah, I know it's a non-ever going thing. And it always comes up for me like just before a session. I'm like, oh, the drive's full.
Yeah.
Oh crap. I've got to move things off to archive drives. And I start that and I'm all proud of myself. And then I look at the timer. I'm like, this is going to take 96 hours or something like that. And the session's tomorrow morning. So that's not going to work.
Yeah. It always falls on the worst possible day too.
Yeah. What are some things that you do for backup? You got any tips for us about how to keep all this important work safe?
Yeah. So three ways that I back up. One is I have an external drive bay, which is basically duplicates of all my drives, and I just back those up manually. I run Backblaze on my computer, which is a great life-saving service that runs cloud backup constantly in the background. So whenever you turn on your computer, it's constantly uploading new data to your cloud backup. It's super low CPU, so it doesn't interfere with any computer functions. And if you need to recover something, you literally just go into your account and you find it in your little backup archive, and you just pull it from the cloud, and then you have it. And then
it even does some clever stuff where, let's say what you needed to pull was like 2 terabytes worth of stuff. They'll throw it on a drive and send it to you, and you just get a physical drive. And if you return the drive soon enough, I think they refund you for the drive or something like that, and it only costs you shipping. It's really a genius application.
Oh, cool! I didn't know that they refunded you for the drive.
Something like that. Yeah. Don't put me on the spot there, but they make it pretty damn easy to decide to just either download it or get a drive. And the only caveat or the thing to be aware of, Rockstars, if you do get into it, is when you do a Backblaze account, you can use it. You have to choose which computer it's going to be assigned to. So like in your case, it would be assigned to your laptop. In mine, it would be assigned to my studio computer, but it's not going to also back up my podcast computer right here unless I do a second account for that. And when you first do your backup, if you've got 6 terabytes worth of stuff on your computer, it's going to send that much data up to the cloud. And so you have to manage that, because you could hit your data cap pretty quickly depending on your internet service and stuff like that. But I think you can tell it to do it slowly if you want. Yeah,
there's parameters you can adjust to, like adjust the speed at which it uploads. Anyway, it's a super cool service. Sounds like you've made it a lot of use.
Well, I learned about it on the podcast from people like you, and I just finally got my act together and got it, and it's been great. And it hasn't had to save my ass yet, but I've seen that it's always ready and waiting, so it's very, very effective. And then I guess the one last thing is you can store enormous amounts of data on there too. I think it's fairly unlimited, but those drives that you're storing would have to be like every 30 days it's rolling over. So if you haven't hooked up that drive in 30 days, then it's going to remove it from your backup. So whatever it is that you want to back up. It's meant to be a snapshot of like, what do you use all the time on your main computer in the past month? So the thing I was saying is that the way that Backblaze works, just a last thought about it, is it looks at a snapshot of what is connected to your computer in the past 30 days. So if you want to always keep connecting like many drives to that computer, then it will back up all that stuff. But if you basically have some main drives that are always connected, then that's what's going to get backed up. And if you have archive drives that you hook up, but then disconnect after 30 days, if those drives haven't been hooked up again, it's going to remove those from the backup, thinking you don't need to keep those backed up anymore. So just a way to think about it. Think about Backblaze as not necessarily your long-term archive for everything you've ever done, but your really great snapshot of everything you've done in the last month.
Yeah. It's actually for that reason I've been bummed that I've lost some stuff on like really old computers that I wish I had backed up elsewhere.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's a really key point to bring up for sure.
Yeah. And then I guess the other thing I'm doing is I've got a time machine backup going at the same time that's just like backing up the whole computer, and that can be really useful too. So
nice.
And then what do you do with old projects? Do you have a system for how you like to archive something long term? When you're going to put it on the shelf?
Yeah, I'll just throw it onto my backup hard drive, which is 10 terabytes, so plenty of space. And those are also connected to Backblaze, so they're those are double backed up.
Nice, double. All right, cool. All right, so let's keep geeking. You were talking about going to your rack of synths over there, or your table of synths, and doing things with sounds where you can't always expect it, and you just got to record it in and then chop it up or something. Talk more about that process. How should we think about doing that part of our creative process? How is it different from intentionally adding a part to a production?
For me, it's just embracing a state of play. Like I'm not going in with I might go in with some idea of what I want out of it, but with no specific outcome in mind. Because, you never know what you're going to stumble upon when you're using semi-modular synths, and that's the joy. So yeah, I just go in and get messy and just let the audio run and see what happens, and then go back and chop it up and see what I like.
So specifically, you've got stuff, you're pressing play on the session.
Yeah.
And you're playing some tracks and sending it over there, or you're playing a new part that's going, being added on a new track. And then you sort of like playlist that track a bunch of times and then go back and listen through. And when you find something that was really cool, you just steal it out of there and put it on a new track.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I'll rarely play whatever synth part over a track. Like it'll always be a cappella, because I'll just be like looking for things in the thing that I'm recording. It's not like I'm doing a take over a pre-existing track, if that makes sense.
Oh, so don't think about it like an overdub. Think about it like the song's here and you go past the end of the song and then you just record on open runway on a new track.
Right.
Where you're just making sounds, and then
it feels like you're like excavating, you're just like, you're doing a dig and you just don't quite know what you're going to find.
I think that's encouraging to hear, because one of the frustrations for me is going to mess with things like that and feeling like, well, that was pretty cool, but what about this? And then ultimately ending up just feeling stupid, like I just don't know enough about how to use it. Whereas I think the reminder is, no, you're supposed to accidentally stumble on things and then recognize that, hey, that thing that just happened was really good. Let's keep that bit and put it into the production somehow.
Yeah, I think that's definitely how I work. And to get back to your point, what we were talking about with David Lynch, it's like learning to recognize when you have found something and just like allowing yourself to go with that idea instead of getting the choice anxiety, which all of us know, which is like, oh, I could keep going or find something better, or maybe I should just delete this. Like, no, it's like, okay, you did find something. Let's see it to its end.
Do you feel like the time you've spent watching YouTube videos, trying out mix tricks, and tweaking version after version of your mixes has not gotten you anywhere? Have you been looking for a simple or straightforward step-by-step process for creating a pro mix that won't take years to learn? What if you could learn that process from a Grammy-winning mix engineer who understood all your mixing struggles and could coach you through them? If you struggle with any of these questions, then the Ultimate Mixing Masterclass is for you. Now you can discover a proven step-by-step mix system from Grammy-winning mixer Craig Alvin for consistently creating a pro-quality mix from your home studio that will sound amazing everywhere. Here's a quote from one of the students. "Absolutely the most informative and helpful block of information mentoring on the mix process I've ever been a part of. This was like sitting behind a mix engineer for years, watching and picking up tips along the way, condensed into a 6 to 7 hour session. Look, when you're ready to take your mixes to Grammy-winning quality, then go to ultimatemixingmasterclass.com and go check out Craig's ultimate snare mixing trick now for free." Okay, The Great Derangement from your band Arswain, that has some really cool stuff. There's like, you got soundscape stuff, you got cellos that are sort of playing in the beginning, and then you've got some plucked Asian instruments that come in, and then the bass drops in, and your bass is freaking massive. What are some of the things about how to integrate these disparate elements together? How do we make sure that things are in tune together and that I can't tell if what you did were samples or if they're performances that you played, but they kind of sound like you took samples, and maybe that's just your clever way of using sample synths and then re-editing it so that it sounds like you found it on a record somewhere. But, how should we think about making the tuning work between this variety of stuff? Is that an issue?
Yeah, well, to answer your first question, it's definitely a mixture of samples and live stuff. The sort of driving bass beat is a modular synth, and the plucky stuff is more samples, except for the guitars. Those are all played by me. Yeah, it's an interesting track because I was uncomfortable with that track for the longest period of time just because it felt like this kind of weird mixture of sounds that don't normally go together. And it's one of the tracks on the album that I think has aged the best with me because I feel like I actually took a risk and did something different.
You were just uncomfortable because you're crazy, dude, because this track sounds awesome.
Well, thank you. But it starts as this kind of Nine Inch Nails-y beat thing and then turns into this prog rock,
Yeah. How did you do the drums in the outro? Those are amazing sounding.
Those are recorded by my good friend Jacob Lowing, who's an incredible drummer, mostly in the metal scene, actually. He's a really good metal drummer. And he did maybe 4 takes on that solo at the end. And
so he did the drum takes in that tempo? Or did you guys do something where you... Okay, all right. Yeah. I thought for sure this was done in slow tempo and then it was manipulated into high speed stuff. But I guess if you got a good metal drummer, you can handle that kind of thing.
Yeah, no, he nailed it. Very little comping was done after the fact.
They sound processed. They sound treated and they sound gated and sampled in a almost it's like an acoustic drum kit, but it's not quite an acoustic drum kit, right?
I mean, it is an acoustic drum kit, I can assure you that, but the mix engineer definitely gave it a facelift. His name's Jules de Gasperi. He mixed that album and made them sound super punchy. And at first I actually was a little bit taken aback. I was like, okay, these drums are massive. We need to dial them back a little bit. And we found a happy medium. But they
turned out great. So you guys definitely, the happy medium was a good place to land.
I think it's an important opportunity to sort of bring up how important it is to work with a mix engineer who can actually challenge you on your assumptions and force you to embrace sounds that you wouldn't otherwise, that are actually better for the record than what you think they are. That was an instance where he made the drums bigger. And I was initially reluctant. And then over time, I was like, no, I'm just used to hearing the drums a certain way. It doesn't mean they're better. So those drums sound the way they do because of a third-party intervention.
Yeah. Nice. Third-party intervention.
Yeah.
Very cool. So now you've got all this music, you finish a record like we've got in your playlist here. And what do you do with these things? You're working and collaborating with people. You talked about how it's an investment on your part as an artist to invest in promotion, publicity, mixing engineers, mastering engineers. How do you tie all that together in your own mind so that it makes sense to follow through all the way to the end with the stuff and have this, be hopefully a successful business model as a career as an artist?
Such a good question. One that I'm still learning. I think the important thing for me to say up front is that I'm not treating Arswain as a business endeavor. It's something I'm losing money on for sure.
All right.
But, I make money in film scoring, and I'm at peace with the fact that that's where my career is. And Arswain is this kind of other sacred thing that I get to do because I think it's interesting. And what follows from it will follow. That said, I just finished my new record, actually, the writing process, and I shipped it off to my mix engineer, Zach Moses, I can't wait to hear what he does on it. And then I'll probably get it mastered by Mike Bosey in LA, who is just amazing. And I think the strategy right now is honestly I'm releasing a few more singles between now and then to, kind of build engagement on streaming platforms, which unfortunately you kind of need to do. There's video content in the works for this new album, which will definitely accompany the release. My publicist is working on getting write-ups. I think for me, the focus is not so much streaming numbers. As you mentioned earlier, my stuff it's not pop, and it's not necessarily conventional. I don't really care about radio play. That's not even in the cards for me, I think. I think what I care about is music blog attention and critical write-ups. I think that's where the bulk of my exposure is going to come from, or at least the type of exposure that I want.
It's very artistic music, so you probably have a lot of parallels to what a fine artist looks for in opportunity as well.
Yeah, I hope so. Everyone has their own strategy. I really admire people who write pop. I think pop is really challenging, and getting that music released on those channels is its own challenge. And I definitely don't feel above that at all. That's just I'm just not qualified for it. So my strategy
you just
is
do
a
a
little
different thing.
Yeah. So I think the idea is get write-ups, get some buzz, get your numbers up as much as possible, even though no one likes playing that game. And just see what happens from there. Hopefully start playing some live shows.
Yeah. So that's my next question. What does a live performance look like for Arswain? Whether it's something that's already happened or whether this is, in your imagination still and what you can dream up.
I think what I love about the live versions of my songs is that it's not even for me to try to play them true to the studio version is just not possible. And that's liberating because I can just do something different. And in fact, I actually love bands the most that whose live renditions are distinct from their studio versions. I think some great examples are Dark Side is a band I love. Nicholas Jarre and Dave Harrington. Their live set is so different from their studio album. Nowhere is another band I love with Lewis Cole and Genevieve Artadi, and their studio stuff sounds like electronic jazz dubstep, and then they play live and they're just a jazz ensemble that play with
nice.
Keys, bass, drums. And I think the tension between the studio versions and the live versions, that tension and the difference between the two is actually what creates a really compelling live performance, because the audience is constantly cross-checking what they're hearing and seeing versus what the memory of the album is. So for me, I like to I'll try to play with the drummer on a lot of my tracks, even if the tracks don't have a kit, or get a guitarist to come play synth parts instead of the synths. Just experimenting with that will be really fun.
Yeah, well, I've enjoyed seeing a variety of live performances of stuff like this. There have been bands out of Nashville that were bringing analog synths all onto the stage, and there'd be like a singer and two synth composers, and they had on the obligatory glasses with the lamp, the flashlights on them, old school. And then going to Bonnaroo, where I was for 15 years running the backstage studio, and then going out and sort of seeing what's the performances are and what the DJ sets look like. Over that 15 years, what was once a live stage for bands got converted into a DJ stage because it was just the nature of music and what was happening with performances. And then, you can have one person up there on stage and it's all about this massive video production, and they might be playing pre-recorded stuff. But there were also bands like Bright Lights that would come, and you'd have, kind of DJ composition with a live drummer at the same time. Mm-hmm. And that could be really compelling because it has an energy, and a power to playing the parts really well like that. So I agree with you. I think it's cool to look for ways to make the live event compelling because there's a human energy coming off the stage. But I think it was Deadmau5 actually that said it, that like you got a choice. Like you can either make really great sounding electronic music for live and you just have to play what was recorded, or you can make pretty good sounding electronic music live from the stage and you can make it all yourself in the moment.
I guess I fall into the latter then, according to the Deadmau5 standard.
Never mind that guy. He hadn't been on the podcast yet.
Hey, oh yeah. Well, I guess that puts me above Deadmau5.
There you go. No, but I mean, it's those are questions that we're faced with. And then even as somebody just trying to write songs with a guitar, I found myself faced with a question at one point. I was like, well, I wrote all these songs on acoustic and they're pretty cool. And now I want to hit the studio and record an EP. What do I do next? Do I learn all these as electric guitar songs and then figure out how they sound with a rock band? Do I keep them as acoustic as something else? There's a whole process. It doesn't matter what kind of music you're making about like, how do you go from concept, thank you, David Lynch, to production, all the way out to release and then to live performance and what that looks like.
Yeah. It's fun too, isn't it? Like when there are kind of no rules and like one pathway isn't necessarily better than another. It's just a matter of what'll be most fun. To get back to the selfishness of performing, it's like whatever will be most fun for you to play is usually what will yield the best outcome. So
I love it. And that mirrors a lot of the tips that we get on the show. Just the reminder that like what's fun for you means that you're probably including a lot of yourself in this thing. Those things tend to go hand in hand. And that as a result of that, you're probably going to do your best work. And as a result of doing your best work, you probably have your best shot at connecting with people and having people like what you did, So that is, it all begins with the self and that original idea, right?
Absolutely. It's trite, but it's true.
I love it. It's trite, but it's true. All right, dude, I have kept you for so long, man. Thank you so much for doing this podcast with us. It's been an absolute blast to hang out with you and philosophize and hear some of these great studio and production tips from you too. I'm going to ask you one last question. I like to ask all my guests. This one is hypothetical, and we're going to take the Wayback Studio machine, and you go back and you find young Freddy who's in his red shirt, who's thinking, I wonder if there's anything else for me I could get into, for a career. And you say, listen, I've come back to give you this one bit of advice, young Freddy. Here is the single most important thing you need to understand and know in order to become a rock star of the recording studio yourself one day. What advice would you go back and give yourself if you could?
The thing that makes you feel most unqualified to do what you're doing is usually the thing that's actually your strongest asset. I felt unqualified to enter film scoring because I wasn't classically trained. I didn't really listen to film music. Like, I don't listen to John Williams or Hans Zimmer in my spare time. I just think that's kind of weird. And for the longest time, I was like, oh, there's no way I could be a composer. Like, I don't have the esteem to be labeled a composer. But what I learned is that I actually brought a bunch of different things to the table that maybe, I don't want to say gave me an upper hand, but certainly set me apart from a lot of people who maybe went through more conventional, traditional pathways. Whether that's a matter of what kind of musical taste you have, or maybe that's, if you're not great at string writing, maybe you're great at synth design. Whatever it is, I think the thing that you're most insecure about your ability is usually the thing that's going to give you your voice. So it's a hard thing to realize in the moment when you're feeling the weight of the world.
Insecure.
When you're feeling deeply insecure. But I think over time, it's what you realize.
Wow, that's heavy, man. I love it. Well, thank you again, Freddy, for joining us on Recording Studio Rockstars. I really enjoyed discovering your music. Rockstars, a reminder, please scroll down. You'll find a music playlist there and links to the website where you can go see some of these gorgeous videos with Index Thumb, Willow's fine work on your music. And let the Rockstars know where they can find out more about you, Freddy. What if they're ready to, I don't know, come see your shows or looking for ways to collaborate? Or what if they got an amazing film that just needs a score? How should they contact you?
Absolutely. Yeah. So if you want to listen to Arswain, my album Partitioning, and a few singles that have been released since then, you can go to my website, Arswain Official. That's Arswain, by the way, is spelled Arswain. And my Instagram is Arswain, blank space. For film scoring stuff, my website is freddyavismusic.com. Awesome.
Well, dude, I look forward to meeting you in person, and I'm going to enjoy listening to your stuff.
Lidge, thank you for having me on the show. It was a joy to talk to you. Truly.
Cool, man. Yeah, you too, dude. We'll talk soon, and thanks so much for listening, Rockstars.
Thanks. Take care.
Thanks so much for listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. If you enjoyed the show and want to help make it better, then please share this episode with your friends on social media and leave a rating and review on iTunes to help the podcast reach more rock stars like yourself. You can click directly over to iTunes or go to rsrockstars.com/review for an easy explanation. And remember to hit the subscribe button to keep up with weekly episodes. And if you're ready to make your best record ever now, then head over to Recording Studio Rockstars Academy, where you can start with my free course at mixmasterbundle.com. And if you want more free content from Recording Studio Rockstars, all you have to do is go to rsrockstars.com/email. Again, that's rsrockstars.com/email to enter your name and email, and I'll keep you in the loop with articles, videos, podcast updates, and even free gear giveaways for your studio. Just look for the link in the show notes below. Thanks so much for listening, and thanks for being a rock star. I'm Lidge Shaw, and this is Recording Studio Rockstars. Now, go make great music. Recording Studio Rockstars would like to give a big thank you to our amazing sponsors who help make this episode possible: OWC, Spectra 1964, Sampley, and Isotope. Remember to use these coupon codes for special discounts. At isotope.com/rockstars, use the coupon code ROCK10 for 10% off any plugin purchase, or start your extended 30-day free trial subscription to access many of their plugins. At Sampley.app, sign up for a free account with 2 projects now, and later use the coupon code RSR20 to get 20% off the first 3 months when you upgrade to a pro account. At recordingstudiorockstars.com/academy, use the coupon ROCKSTAR for 10% off any course for a limited time. You will find links to all these awesome sponsors in our show notes. These are all things I highly recommend for your studio. They're going to help you make your best record ever. I would also like to thank our fantastic team here at Recording Studio Rockstars: Vlad Weselchenko, Braden Stremming, and John Richardson for additional podcast and video production. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you in our next episode. Cheers.